talk about Newsom, because there's a bunch of energy stuff happening in the United States that I think is important.
All right. So the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which obviously has a side, wrote an op-ed on California's grid issues. Some of the quotes from the op-ed: California can barely keep the lights on as its climate policies bite the electric grid, but Gavin Newsom is undaunted. On Friday, he signed no fewer than 40 new climate bills to amp up California's green energy shock experiment. Even as gasoline prices nationwide have fallen to an average of $3.68 a gallon, Californians are still paying $5.45 a gallon. California's electric rates are already more than double those in neighboring states. This is what happens when politicians try to eliminate fossil fuels with a Molotov cocktail of regulation, taxes, and renewable mandates and subsidies.
The coda to this is, I'll send it to you, Nick, but can you please play the clip as well of Rashida Tlaib trying to skewer Jamie Dimon, where he just destroys her?
Oh my God, that's embarrassing.
That was embarrassing.
I mean, we should play it. I mean, she made no sense.
Nick, can you play that clip, please?
You have all committed, as you all know, to transition the emissions from lending and investment activities to align with pathways to net zero in 2050. Do you know what the International Energy Agency has said is required to meet our global 2050 net zero targets of limiting global temperature rise to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.5 degrees Celsius? So no new fossil fuel production starting today. That's like zero. So I would like to ask all of you and go down the list, because again, you all have agreed to doing this. Please answer with a simple yes or no. Does your bank have a policy against funding new oil and gas products? Mr. Dimon?
Absolutely not, and that would be the road to hell for America.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Sir, you know what? Everybody that got relief from student loans has a bank account with your bank should probably take out their account and close their account. The fact that you're not even there to help relieve many of the folks that are in debt, extreme debt because of student loan debt, and you're out there criticizing it.
My favorite was when she said Celsius.
That was, I was like, okay. It's just so much theatrics.
Rashida Tlaib represents the 13th district, congressional district in Michigan. The median age in that district is 35.9 years old. The 2020 poverty rate is 28.2%, so more than almost 1 in 3 people. And the 2020 median household income is $37,601. So, you know, she represents a group of people that, you know, I think at best is lower middle class. And the idea that she doesn't even basically understand what would happen in her district if you actually did not have cheap LNG, again, just kind of speaks to the institutional kind of decay in Washington. She is not the person that should be advocating for this. Like, you know, it's districts like this more than any other that don't have the money to spend on, you know, very expensive solar installations that cost $30,000 and $40,000. These are the districts that need coal-fired plants, LNG, oil to keep going, to sort of minimize the impacts of inflation. And so, you know, that was just like a grandstanding moment. Moving to California.
I hate these hearings because, Chamath, these are important discussions and they've become theatrics. And this is a chance to educate the public with some charts and data.
She's either so hungry for power that she actually doesn't care about her constituents, or she's scientifically and numerically illiterate.
I think the latter is probably the issue here.
And so this is what's such a shame. On the other side, you know, at the other end of the coast in California, the cost of power generation, just so you guys know, has fallen by 90% when you look at renewables. And that is because of a good job that the federal government did in introducing subsidies that essentially gave the right sets of incentives for people to build this infrastructure. But while the cost of generating renewable power has fallen by 90% to, you know, virtually it's on par and it's cheaper than any other form of generation, your electricity costs have doubled and are probably going to double again in a state like California. So, you know, we're catering our utility rates by, you know, 7 to 11% every year. That is unsustainable in California. And what do you have? You have, again, a different version of the same flu that Rashida Tlaib has, which is you run forward to kind of virtue signal and to try to do all of these things. You don't spend enough time to really understand what's happening on the ground, and you make it impossible for people to make the decisions to actually be resilient for themselves. At the end of the day, there are tens of utilities in America, but there are 100 million households. And the only path to energy independence is to get every single 100 million household to be resilient, which means they need their own solar panels, they need battery storage, they need their own potable water. And all of these systems are now affordable and available. And now the federal government, with the IRA, has created the financial incentives to pull it forward. So I don't know. I just think like this is a hugely stark reminder about how poorly our energy policy has been managed. And if you leave it to the hands of the progressive left, they will do things that don't map to what people on the ground actually need. People in California, most people in California, cannot pay utility rates that are going to double every 6 and 7 years. Just like people in the congressional 13th district of Michigan cannot afford to pay for solar if Rashida Tlaib is able to get, all these banks to not finance LNG, coal, and other forms of hydrocarbons as a bridge fuel.
You have to look at all 40
years.
of these bills independently, and you have to think
40
about
40 bills? I mean, who's reading these things? What is in these things?
I mean, each one has to be addressed individually. Like one of them could be to help people put solar panels on top of schools and batteries. That could be a good bill. But there definitely needs to be.
We have that mechanism at the federal level. The IRA passed an incredible set of incentives, both for the producers of these things and for the end companies that actually deploy them.
Yep.
And so we've solved that problem, So I just think like it just goes to show you a ton of regulation does not actually add and get to the solution that we want. The government will not solve your problems. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they are going to make things more complicated and more expensive. And the resilience that you expect out of your utility infrastructure, by the way, we saw just what happened last week. There was a massive fire and a massive battery installation that California installed, 182 megawatt system. Could you imagine if that had actually lit on fire 2 weeks earlier in the middle of this crazy heat wave that we had? So even utility scale renewables are very complicated projects to undertake.
Look at Texas. People are dying there because the grid keeps going down.
It is much safer and more reliable if every homeowner in the United States took responsibility and used these incentives to basically become your own little virtual power plant. And you will...
Technology's there. And people are getting generators for natural gas as backups. We're going to have to figure out how to take the load off the grid and build resiliency into it. I don't know if you guys saw in a related story that all this ESG stuff is kind of coming to a head, but Dilbert got canceled this week in like 200 newspapers. Did you see this?
What?
Yeah.
How's that possible?
Well, because he's been going after ESG in his cartoon. And so... I'm interested in your take on this, but here, I don't know the characters in Dilbert except for Dilbert, but he says, this person who's in charge says, our ESG score will drop if we open a new factory that adds CO2 to the atmosphere, but we can balance that out by adding more diversity to our board. And I guess the cat says, how much CO2 do you plan to add? And he said, one non-binary board members worth. Showing the ES and the G being put together makes no sense. But that panel obviously got him canceled.
What does it mean he's canceled? Like he was fired from national newspapers?
I think one of the 177 newspapers, because they're all part of chains now, and I guess some of those
because of that cartoon?
That cartoon, plus it's like a series going after the social governance part of environmental and pointing out. He stated on his podcast that he wants to kill ESG. So this whole ESG debate, he's trying to further it, but I guess.
The concept of ESG makes a ton of sense. I think the problem is that
it does?
This version 1.0 implementation was financialized by people that have no care about ESG at all. And so all it's done is create complexity and consultants and, studies.
Wait, you said it makes sense or it doesn't make sense?
No, the words E, S, and G make a lot of sense.
Should they have commas or periods between them, I guess is the question.
That's fine too. But my point is saying that you want, diversity and you want sustainability and you want better governance.
All good.
All of these things are really great ideas. It's just that in this first implementation, it got financially perverted. And so what you have are folks that are, probably not the best positioned or should not really have an opinion about ESG, opining about things that they never were given the authority to opine on. And then as a result, what it's really created is a cottage industry of consultants that can basically make, hundreds of millions of dollars writing all of these reports. And I think that that's why this implementation doesn't work. So ESG today is broken, and I think it's largely meaningless. The concept of what people want is a very good idea. We just need a better way to implement.
I agree with that. You can't connect these things. So we're going to put social and governance with environment. It's all that's going to do is hold back the environment, right?